we have both Dr. Brian Brooks and Lisa Ellington available to answer questions. And I'll turn this back over to Lorena, but the first question here is for Lisa. Are most wastewater treatment plants around the country the same as yours, and how do these compare to wastewater treatment in less developed countries?
My wastewater plant is fairly typical of what you will find. The oxidation ditch system is one of the better types of treatment that you may find in the United States. Now, there are other systems that will treat. There's things like lagoons. Smaller areas can't afford to put in a large wastewater treatment plant system. It may not be necessary because they don't have a lot of industries that discharge, and that was the one thing I did not mention, is that we have several industries that discharge into our system as well. So you may see lagoon systems. If you've been driving through small rural areas, you may actually see large lagoons and you think that's a huge fish pond. That's probably a wastewater treatment plant lagoon system. So yes, but to answer your question, most of the plants in the United States are very typical. What you see here, or what you saw on my plant, is very typical. It may be on a larger scale. As far as other countries, I would have to say we are very fortunate in the United States. We have the Environmental Protection Agency who guides us and tries to help us do the right thing and make sure that we have the proper treatment to protect the public. There are some countries that are not as fortunate. They literally discharge their waste into a river or a stream, and then downstream there is someone actually using that same water for drinking purposes. And a lot of times that's what they tell you. They don't drink the water in foreign countries because there's going to be bacteria in that. They're used to it because they've lived with it all their lives. We're not, and it's going to affect you dramatically. So I hope I answered that question. If not, please ask again.
Thank you. We have a question here for Brian. What is the state of knowledge in general of human health effects due to PPCPs compared to the environmental effects, like aquatic organisms?
It's a great question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, the short of it is that the preponderance of evidence indicates, at least for developed countries, and I think Lisa had some good comments there regarding relative quality of wastewater infrastructure in places like the United States, parts of Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, for example, Japan, the more developed countries. But of course, having been to places like Guadalajara, Mexico, and Beirut, Lebanon, and Hanoi, Vietnam, I can say considerably the wastewater treatment infrastructure is not as prevalent there. And so if we were to look at relative preponderance of evidence related to human health or ecological impacts, most of the concern with pharmaceuticals in particular are related to ecological concerns. The exception would be for antibiotic resistance. And what you may have seen in the press just recently is that the FDA has made a decision to be a bit more stringent in the use of antibiotics in veterinary applications and larger production agricultural activities. So this is an effort to try to get ahead of essentially increased prevalence of antibiotic-resistant organisms, which represent a leading threat to global public health. And so I think the circumstance is going to differ, but for those of you who are in North America, the majority of the wastewater infrastructure would be considered to essentially reduce enough of many of these substances to levels below which would be concerns for, say, human exposure, again, based upon the evidence that we have. But in the case of ecological considerations for a number of these very diverse classes of molecules, this represents a current area of active research.
Thank you. Do we have more? Okay. I was wondering, Lisa, if you could address for a minute what you would like to see water educators do to raise awareness in the public about this issue and concern?
I think we need to be very vocal. We need to go into our schools and teach our youth. They are the future. They are the ones that may end up solving this problem. We also, any civic clubs, churches, anywhere that you can go to get the word out, that's what we need to do, because unless we get the word out to the public, there are so many issues out there they are not aware of, and they will respond. I know several years ago when I first became involved with the WET project and they had the drug take-back days, our police department, we did not have a drop box, and trying to get a drop box in there was, it was difficult to say the least. However, we got an officer, our DARE officer actually became more involved, and I think it was the Rotary Club here in Paragould actually helped raise money to put a drop box in, and they now have a drop box up there. And they, I meant to get the information from the DARE officer to find out exactly how many pounds, but it's unreal the number of pounds that they collect regularly. And in fact, I ran into the DARE officer not too long ago, several weeks ago, and he said we are really taking up a lot of pharmaceuticals and keeping it out of children's hands, number one, and number two, keeping it out of our water supplies. So getting the word out, that is what's important. There were articles about that. Being Paragould Light, Water, and Cable, we have our own cable studio. We produce our own commercials that we put out there on the air on some of the stations. We have done commercials about it. I go into the schools and talk about it any chance that I get. So we as environmental professionals, we need to get out there and get the word out, and that is so important, because unless we do, we're not going to get anywhere, because no one knows about it, and no one knows what they can do to protect our water resources and our children and our water supplies.
It sounds like there's a unique combination of new players especially in our arena of water education, and I'm referring to the armed, police force in a community that might see rounding up pharmaceuticals as as a legal issue rather than as a health issue.
I think they saw it as a legal issue at first, but I think that they have, well, the DARE officer, for instance, that had been coming out, he saw it more as a legal issue, but after hearing some of what we discussed during the Project WET workshops that we've held here in Paragould, they have learned a lot. It's not just about keeping it out of the hands of the children, but it's also keeping it out of our water resources. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And do you have any comments about nursing homes as being a point source rather than a non-point source?
They would be considered a point source.
Are they?
Well, they discharge into our system, so they, as far as I'm concerned, they're a point source. They would be a non-point source according to EPA, but to me they are a point source because they discharge directly into my system. So anything that they discharge is going to come through my plant.
Oh, okay.
Lorena, I've got a comment as well, if that's
okay,
useful.
Great.
I think Lisa's right on target, and the different approaches that states have taken is still kind of a moving field. For example, we had worked with the state of New York a number of years ago, specifically on the hospital nursing home concept, the idea of essentially treating them like the equivalent of an industrial pretreatment operation. I think it's very important also, Lisa was commenting about getting these things out of the hands of kids. We didn't realize when we were involved starting this research 15 years ago that we would find a partnership essentially with physicians. But now I'm not sure if everybody really appreciates that the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention consider the abuse of unused medicines a national scale epidemic. In 2011, I believe, more people died in the United States from the abuse of unused medicine than heroin and cocaine combined. And so that's led essentially for the White House's Office of National Drug Control Policy to essentially be very supportive of the Drug Enforcement Administration's National Take Back Program. And in fact, this is something that you wouldn't always think about water educators engaging with law enforcement and broader public health professionals. But I think collectively, since you are essentially diverting a waste stream from abuse and ultimately harming humans, but then also indirectly causing potential environmental impacts, this is a really great way for us to empower citizens to become part of a solution by disposing of medicines in a proper way.
Thank you. That is an excellent point. I'm looking at the clock, and our time is coming to an end. And I think we have time for one more question, and this is for either of you. Are there any new exciting friends in the field that you know about that would lead to either source reduction for PPCPs or more effective removal at the end of use?
Lisa, I can fire off one perspective,
Okay.
if that's useful, and you may have others to add. There's a couple of things that I think have shorter term and then potentially longer term benefits. In our experience over the last few years, we've been focusing on constructed wetlands. Where we live here in Texas, water recycling or water reuse represents a very important part of our future water supply. Okay, we're drought susceptible. We're going to double in population in the next 40 to 50 years, and finding a way to recycle water for human consumptive uses, for other uses, industrial, agriculture, while maintaining ecological habitat uses is really the next challenge. And so constructed wetlands may represent a part of a shorter-term solution in that they may polish wastewater that would normally be essentially reclaimed through processes like Lisa was mentioning and then released back into streams or lakes, but they essentially form the function of nature's kidney. So they're polishing that wastewater. Well, at the same time, they essentially can be very attractive to landowners because they can be placed sometimes in essentially trust or long-term contracts that provide great habitat for migratory wildlife. In the longer term, some other areas that's gaining quite a bit of momentum is in the area of green pharmacy. And so, for example, we're working with the International Pharmaceutical Federation, which is based in The Hague in the Netherlands. And so what they're doing is they're trying to provide guidance to pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists. And some countries, for example, Sweden, are developing green labeling programs where different aspects of substances can be identified based upon anticipated environmental hazards. More broadly defined, the field of green chemistry is attempting to design substances that are less hazardous so you don't have a problem down the line. So essentially more preventative in nature. So I think between some shorter term options of employing sort of environmentally friendly wetlands that have to be designed and maintained properly to achieve greater water quality goals, then thinking long term, taking actually some ideas from designing safer medicines and applying those same types of levels of understanding to reduce environmental impacts appears quite promising.
Thank you very much. I wish that we had more time where we could be asking you both of you more questions, and I would like to extend a special invitation to our Sustaining the Blue Planet conference this summer here in Big Sky. Well, actually I'm in Bozeman, but in Big Sky, Montana, and it would be an honor to have you here. So we're going to end up today. I have a few last things to say. First, we will be sending you an email. It's a constant contact survey to help us evaluate today's webinar. Your ideas are so helpful to us, helping us to improve. And then I'd like to say a very special thank you once again to Lisa Ellington and Dr. Brian Brooks, the PPCP WET team, and then to awesome Barbara Miller for making this happen for us. Many, many thanks.